Hello and welcome to this Music Excellence London webinar on assessment in Key Stage 3 music, delivered by the ISM Trust. My name's Jane Werry and I'm Director of Music at Hayes School in Bromley. Before we begin, we've got a few technical points. You should be able to see my PowerPoint presentation, and if you are here at the live broadcast, you should also be able to see me. You should be able to hear me, but I can't hear you. So if you have any questions, please type them in the question box and I'll answer as many as I can either at the end of the presentation or as I go through, depending on how it goes. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on the ISM's website at ism.org/webinars. So if there's anything that you need to go back to because you didn't catch it at the time, then that will be perfectly possible later on. Before I really get going, I just want to outline what my intentions are for this webinar. There's been a lot of great stuff already published about music assessment. I'm thinking here about Martin Faulkner's book, Assessment in Music Education, and the materials that he's produced for the ISM with Ali Daubney. They did a really great webinar for the ISM back in 2015, which you can view on the ISM website and which I would highly recommend. I don't want to contradict any of the great things that people like Martin and Ali have already said. What I do want to do here is provide examples from my own school and from a few other places of how the ideas work in practice. When I look at things like the teachers' forums on Facebook, I get a really strong feeling that music teachers feel isolated and are just dying to know what people are doing in other schools. So I hope that having a detailed insight into what we're doing at my school might be useful to you. I'll also refer to examples of great practice that I know about in other schools as well. What I'm really interested in here are assessment strategies that really work for both teachers and students in a really practical way in the classroom and give teachers and students the information that they need. I also do get the feeling that a lot of teachers, through no fault of their own, and often because of the fixation that their managers have on what they think Ofsted are wanting, teachers spend a lot of time worrying about things that aren't really important. One of the things I want to do here is give you some of my own opinions, and they really are just my own opinions, about avoiding barking up the wrong trees. So they really are my own views, and you can take them or leave them as you see fit. Martin and Ali have been very eloquent about the way in which assessment fulfills multiple functions, and I'm just going to stop on this thought for a minute. Who exactly is assessment for, and which of these groups of people are the most important? Teachers need assessment so that they know where their students are at in their learning. It's only through knowing this that they can plan to do things that move their students forward. Students also need to know what it is they are doing that's good, and what they need to do to improve, and how to go about doing this. It has been said that the most important assessment goes on inside a student's head, and I will say more about that later on. In my view, what parents need is actually quite straightforward. They want to know whether their son or daughter is getting on okay or not. Are they doing well? Could they be achieving more? The more involved parents are also keen to know how they could support their child's learning. School systems last and, in my view, least. By school systems, what I mean are your reporting systems, whatever data drops you have to do each term, each half term, or heaven forbid, every fortnight. I have very specific views about how to deal with those that I will talk about later in the webinar. Of these, by far the most important are the needs of the teachers and the needs of the students. Our priority has to be that these needs stay at the forefront of any assessment strategies that we devise. National curriculum levels have been ditched in England. Hallelujah! I, for one, was mighty relieved about this because I never really liked them in the first place. The reasons for ditching levels were extremely sound, in my view, and the final report from the Commission on Assessment Without Levels outlined the reasons for ditching levels in 2015, and that's a really useful document to refer to if ever you need ammunition to back up anything that you're saying to your senior leaders. I'll just spend a minute going through the reasons for ditching levels, the problems with them. Levels were always intended to be summative, In other words, to be used as a judgment at the end of a key stage, not even at the end of a year, but at the end of a whole key stage. They were never supposed to be applied to single pieces of work or single lessons. They're open to widely varying interpretations because they're based on descriptors, and even an amazingly well-written descriptor can be interpreted in many different ways. They create a false impression that progress is linear. All teachers know that progress is a messy thing, that you can come on in leaps and bounds, have long stagnant periods, go back 2 steps and forward 1, and the idea that it's linear is clearly just a fallacy. Level statements were becoming labels for students. One of the saddest things that you could ever hear a student say is, "I'm a 3B." To have your whole relationship with music reduced to "I'm a 3B" is just such a sad thing. How much nicer would it be if a student said in answer to the question, "How are you doing in music?" "Well, I'm actually getting so much better at playing the keyboard with 2 hands, and perhaps I need to practice holding a harmony line a bit more," than to just say, "I'm a 3B and my friends are 4A. The other thing about them is that they encourage undue pace. We all know as musicians that music really needs practice, and you could use levels to create an illusion of progress that encourages rushing through things, and that just really isn't what we're about in music. We know that we need to take our time, go back over things and practice them repeatedly in order to make proper, real progress. All of these 5 things that are on the screen now are really valid points. And whatever assessment strategies we devise, we need to make sure that they don't fall into the same traps. If something looks like a level and behaves like a level, then really it is a level. One of the other schools that I want to refer to today is George Green School in East London, where Jason Kobilius is the head of music. They have a really great system for post-levels music assessment, which Jason describes in detail on his blog, and I've put a link to this on the last slide of my presentation so you can catch it there. Jason wrote an absolutely brilliant assessment policy based on 10 principles, some of which I'm going to refer to today. And if you're in the position of having to write your own departmental assessment policy, I would really urge you to look at the one from George Green School, which is freely available. The first of Jason's principles is curriculum comes first. Whatever assessment we have comes from the curriculum, not the other way around. So the assessment needs to be driving the curriculum needs to be driving the assessment. We don't want to have a system where the tail wags the dog in this respect. The other document I'd like to mention at this stage is the ISM Framework for Assessment in Key Stage 3 Music. Again, there's a link at the end of my webinar. This includes a list of big questions. It's a process to work through with your department which will enable you to decide exactly what your priorities are in designing your Key Stage 3 music curriculum. They aren't questions with right or wrong answers. They're there purely to enable you to have a clear idea of what your principles actually are. The whole point with them is to ensure that we assess what we value, not measure what is simply easy to measure. At my school, the process that we went through was getting every department to identify specific things. We've got skills, which we identified as things students can actually do, knowledge, which is things that students can recall, concepts, things that students understand, and learning attributes, qualities that good learners have. And we wrote them onto a little jigsaw, the idea being that these things contribute to overall mastery of a subject. We have specific learning attributes that are common to all subjects at my school, so I won't dwell on those too much. Most schools have got something along those lines of the qualities that good learners have. And what I've got on my lists of skills, concepts and knowledge, you might be interested in them. What's important really though is that you identify the skills, knowledge and concepts that you want to include in your curriculum. But mine are there for you to have a look at if you're interested, and you can always come back to this slide on the recording of the webinar that will be available through the ISM website later on. I want to touch on where this fits into a wider context just briefly. All of this has got to be school specific. I very much feel, and this is one of my own opinions coming out here, that the whole idea of age-related expectations is one of those things that shouldn't really be a thing. The fabric of your expectations is very complex with many threads. Every time you see a student doing something in one of your lessons, another thread is added to the fabric of your expectations. What you can expect of your students in your school will depend on the amount of curriculum time you have. If you're teaching music on a carousel, it means you've got a lot less time than if you're seeing them for an hour a week, or even in those amazing schools that give music 2 hours a week. And so you'll be able to expect a lot more of your students if you see them for longer, and less if you see them for less time. The other thing that's really important is your students' prior experience. What have they done at primary school? If you work in a borough where there's amazing hub systems for first access at primary schools, then you might have all of your students coming to you in Year 7 with several years of instrumental teaching under their belt already. You may have a mixture of fantastic primary provision and schools where there is nothing, and you're going to need to adjust your expectations accordingly. The bottom line here is that we see where a student is at in their learning, and then we plan to move them on from that point, whatever it is. Baseline assessment is therefore quite essential, but it must be musical. It simply cannot happen in one lesson if it's going to be valid. You could devise a test to assess what students know about music. How many beats has a minim got? Is the sound that you're hearing a violin or a flute? But it's simply impossible to see what they can do in one lesson. In my view, that will take a term, or even longer. It could take the whole of Year 7 to really get a handle on what your students can do in any detail. If you're working in a school where you're allowed to set your own benchmarks, then I would argue for fighting as hard as you can for taking as long as possible to carry out your baseline assessment before you set those benchmarks. I'm now going to talk a little bit about a spreadsheet, which I will also come back to later. I don't actually like spreadsheets at all, and the idea of numbers in a grid makes me feel slightly queasy. But I do like spreadsheets if they're going to do something for me, which is going to help me and my students. It's going to help me with my planning. It's going to help me conform to the school system of assessment. So let's talk about this one, which I do think is going to be helpful. The headings that you can see here, and there's another slide in a minute with some more on, is based on the contents of the skills, knowledge, concepts, attributes jigsaw that I showed you a couple of slides ago. And what I've done is take my list of skills, concepts and knowledge, and I've made them simply into a list of things to be assessed and put that list into headings, singing, playing and so on. These are specific to my school, and what we've decided are the things that we want to assess. Your list may be different. It depends on your priorities. Again, I've used the ISM framework when I've made my list here. There are example statements in that document in all of the categories that I'm showing you here. Here are my other categories. So here we've got improvising, composing, critique and wider skills. These are the things that I've decided are important enough to me and my priorities and my department in our context that I want to make sure that they're in my curriculum and I want to assess them. Note that the knowledge that was identified in the curriculum planning jigsaw is not included here. It is explicitly taught, but I expect it to be demonstrated at Key Stage 3 through musicking, through actual music making. My ideas on that do change at Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5, where I would assess knowledge separately to skills and concepts, and you might decide to make knowledge an explicit thing that you want to assess as part of your Key Stage 3 assessment. But that very much depends on your priorities and what you feel the purpose of Key Stage 3 music actually is. So on to the exciting bit, the radars. I sometimes feel that I'm becoming Mrs. Radar Diagram, so let's get on to this and talk about how these work. The idea in the green box on the right-hand side is paraphrased from the writing of Ron Berger in his book An Ethic of Excellence, and it's what I referred to earlier. Whatever system you use at classroom level has got to be one that gives students a really good idea of what it is they're aiming at. They need to know what really good actually sounds and looks like, as that will inform everything they strive towards. So the systems that you use with students need to make this absolutely explicit. These radar diagrams help to give a structure for this. The radar diagrams are shared with students throughout the project, either electronically or on paper, depending on the way that you work and the systems that you have in place in your department. The number of spokes on your radar may vary. I do realise that I'm mixing my metaphors talking about spokes on a radar, but I'm sure you get the drift there. The number of spokes may vary. I've got 12, which does seem like quite a lot, but our projects last for a whole term. This one's for the first term of Year 7. What we are doing in our first term of Year 7 is a few preliminary one-off activities, practicing playing by ear, doing some basic singing in harmony, and then it culminates in doing a group arrangement, really. It's a mashup over 3 chords based on Emily Sanday's Next to Me. So all of this comes into that. What goes on the spokes, what goes around the outside, are the areas for assessment, and they're chosen from the headings that I had on my spreadsheet, the things that I have deemed to be important enough to me to assess. They're picked just to fit with the content of each topic. So for each topic, I just pick from my spreadsheet whichever ones are appropriate for that particular topic and what we're doing in the topic. Each spoke or area is assessed with 3 grades, and if you've looked at my blog before or seen any of my radars, you'll know that I have used a 5-point scale in the past, but I'm moving now to a 3-point scale. And my 3 grades that I'm marking each area on are can't do yet, can do, and can do really well. You could describe this in more teacher parlance as working towards, working at, and working beyond, but I'm just using really simple language here that I can use with my students. Can't do yet, which is the lowest one, the not yet grade, is an important bit of can-do growth mindset language, as it very much implies that there will be future success, which is obviously something that we want our students to believe. So coming on now to how I actually use the radars in the classroom. We really like this system. We've been using it for a few years now, and we like it and the students like it. From the teacher's point of view, it's a real low hassle method of performing. We use the radars on paper. You might be thinking that sounds a bit Luddite to use it on paper, but it works for us. We're a department with no breakout spaces, no iPads, no bring your own device policy. So paper works for us in that it puts the information into the students' hands when and where they actually need it, which is while they're working on their music. We don't ever attempt to assess every spoke or area in every lesson. It really fits entirely with what they're focusing on at the time, and having that information on the radar diagrams means that you can make that really explicit. You can say, today we're looking at these 2 or 3 things. However, by the end of the project, they will have covered all of the things around the outside. The sheet is with the students while they work, and you can see that with the example that is on the screen at the moment, this is a group of 4 students. So I compile sheets where everybody is on one sheet. If they're working in bigger groups, say with a group of 6, I'd have a double-sided sheet. So each student has their own radar diagram, but the whole group's radars are on one sheet. Students have it while they're working. They give it to me at the end of the lesson, so I look after it between lessons so that I know where it is, basically. There are alternative systems to this. This whole thing could be done electronically. If you're the kind of school where you've got sets of iPads or Chromebooks, you can set up radar diagrams really easily on a spreadsheet program. This whole thing totally could be electronic if that system would work with what you've got in your department. Let me just talk about the colours and what I've actually written onto the sheet that you have in front of you. The colours have come out okay on the scan that I did. well enough, I think, for me to talk you through it and to explain how it works. Basically, each time I write on the sheet, I do it in a different coloured pen. And at the top, you can see the dates that I've written on the sheet, and each date has a different colour. It's a good excuse, if you like me, of having lots and lots of different coloured pens. So on the 8th of the 9th, I was writing in pink, and on that day, I think all I did was listen to all of the kids sing. We have a system where at the beginning of Year 7 we take them out of the room in groups of 3 and we hear them sing individually, and we give them a grade based on that. So that's the only thing that's in that particular shade of pink, and you can see that that's in Sing in Tune, and some of them have got Not Yet, some of them have got Can Do, and some of them have got Can Do Really Well. So as we go through, and this might be that I'm just pootling around the room, visiting each group, listening to what they're doing, putting a few relevant blogs in the relevant places onto the radars, writing any particular comments in the middle that I feel should be written down for the students to refer to next lesson. Or it might be that sometimes we stop and we make a recording of work in progress. I'll say a little bit more about recordings in just a second. And I take all of their sheets in and I write loads of things on them at that point. Where you can see that I've drawn a circle around a blob, it just means that they're at the same grade on a separate date, just to show that they either are maintaining their fabulous standards or that they're still at where they were before. So if, for example, somebody's on Not Yet one week, then they might have got up to Can Do or even Can Do Really Well in subsequent lessons, which is a really good way of working. We can make that really explicit. Should anybody stop by and ask how the class is doing, then they can be invited to go and look on the sheets, and hopefully everything is self-explanatory. They know what they've done. For me, it's a reminder of what I've done and what I've said to them, and it really works for us. If you're doing everything electronically, and if you have a system whereby students can listen back on their own devices in their groups to their recordings of work in progress, then a really good thing can be to leave the recording going at the end of their performance, and then give your verbal feedback. So there is a record of verbal feedback on the recording. Obviously that's only useful if the students are actually going to listen back to it. And recordings really are only useful if they're going to be used by students, otherwise they're just there to make a catalogue to satisfy the system, which in itself isn't really a good enough reason to have them. We store all of our recordings on OneNote, just because that's the system that we use. I know of schools that use all sorts of things, Shobi, Google Classrooms, Beaumont School in St Albans uses the Workflow app as a really streamlined way of getting recordings from an iOS device straight into Evernote or into Google Classrooms or Dropbox. So there are many, many ways of doing this, and it's just a question of finding the way that works for you and for your students and gives your students best access to listening back to the recordings to inform what they do. So the radar diagrams are brilliant for tracking progress over the course of the project, but what we're going to need though is a way to track over longer periods. This is where the spreadsheet comes in, and where a spreadsheet is actually really useful. Now you'll see a little view of a bit of a spreadsheet on the screen in front of you now. The numbers are purely there to making red, amber, green cells on the spreadsheet easy. So I've set up conditional formatting. So when I put in 2, it turns that cell green. When I put in 1, it turns it amber. When I put in 0, it turns it red. It's just much, much quicker than changing the colour of each cell individually. The other good thing about those numbers, and the numbers really are for the teachers only, is that they're there to make the system easier to use and to enable us to make totals as well for the rows and the columns, which I'll talk about in a minute. So the colours are red, amber, green for each assessed area. Green corresponds to Can Do Really Well, amber to Can Do, and red to Not Yet. It builds up over time over projects, perhaps even over the whole of Key Stage 3, to provide a detailed picture of the strengths and areas of development for each student. If a student hits can do very well for a particular area over the course of different projects, I've made it so that the total can go above 2. It still stays green, but the total being more than 2 emphasises that they're doing this thing particularly well repeatedly. A total number for each student, in other words each row on the spreadsheet, is an indicator for the teacher of who is doing particularly well or not so well overall over all of their skills. A total for each column, in other words a total for each skill, can act as a planning tool. If I see over time that one particular thing is not generally being done well by my students, then I know that I need to revisit it or do more on it or think of another way of teaching that particular thing. So it can be useful for me in both of those ways. You can also get a spreadsheet to do more than this. And what I'm doing at the moment, I'm not the spreadsheet expert here, but I have a resident spreadsheet whiz that I've been using to help me on this. I'm going to make this template available. So if you want a copy of it, you're more than welcome to have it. It's going to be available through the ISM website together with the recording of this webinar. It will also be available on the Music Excellence London website as well. So I'll just tell you about a couple more of the things that this could do for you. You could also create an average for each area, so singing, playing, improvising, composing and so on. This can give us a further overview of the strengths and weaknesses of each student and an idea of which things need more lesson time or which things need a particular focus in your teaching. You can use VLOOKUP functions and if functions within your spreadsheet program to link the data on the spreadsheet to a statement bank, which could be used for a couple of different things. You could use this to help you draft statements for reports, or you could use it to provide a ready-made list of personalised targets for students that they keep in their folder or keep somewhere online as a record of what they need to do to improve. So if anybody were to ask your students, do you know what you need to do to improve, they would have a bank of those statements already made that have just popped out of this spreadsheet without you having to go to great lengths to make a list for each individual student. So as I said, I've got a template for this spreadsheet that does all of those things, and it will be available to you if you're remotely interested in taking it and adapting it for your own purposes. I'm going to talk a little bit about school systems and reporting to parents. This is one area where I'm going to take full opportunity to tell you some of my opinions. School systems and reporting to parents have just got to fit in one way or another with what we're doing in the classroom. And to be honest, this may require a certain element of fudging. I'm just going to ponder for a minute the problems with using 9-to-1 grades at Key Stage 3. A lot of them are the same problems as using national curriculum levels, in that GCSE 9-to-1 grades are intended to be summative, not formative. They're intended to be that they're not progressive, they're not linear, they're not something that you work through like your graded exams on an instrument where you may well do grade 3 before you do grade 4 and grade 5. Parents and students don't know necessarily what these grades mean. If a student goes home and says, "Dad, I got a 3C in music," then the dad is likely to reply, "Great, is that good?" So it would be much better if the student could go home and say, "I've got much better at this thing in music. I can play with 2 hands now on the keyboard. My teacher says that my singing in harmony and holding a harmony line in a group has got much better." That's much more meaningful, surely. The other thing about this is that Key Stage 3 students are simply not doing GCSE work. I know that many teachers working in schools using GCSE 9-to-1 grades as a means of reporting all the way through Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 are being required to write descriptors for every grade. Some I know of are having to do this for 3 subgrades within each grade. That's 27 descriptors. There are huge problems with descriptors. Dylan William and Tim Oates and many other people have written about this, and it's easy to find ammunition on the internet from their writing if you need research to back up what you're saying about descriptors at any point. At the best, it's death by adjective and adverb, but that's only the start of it. Imagine having to find 9 gradated adjectives and adverbs in combination to describe, say, performing, and be even remotely certain that you've got those in the right order to show progression. All we have to go on are the off-qual descriptors for grades 8, 5 and 2. Descriptors again. A quick look at these show just how vague they are. They don't tell us much at all. And my thinking is that this could be another example of barking up the wrong tree. Perhaps this is a thing that should not be a thing. Should we focus not on what students can do and what they should be focusing on next instead of assigning a number to a student? We need to use comparison between students based on the fabric of our expectations to make judgment about how well they can do things, rather than try and find some absolute number that describes things. There will, however, inevitably come a time when you're required to convert the information gleaned from your fabulous departmental assessment strategy into something that fits with a whole school system. What can we do here? This is where problems often arise because of unrealistic expectations that progress is some kind of tidy, linear thing, together with the problems that arise from having to use 9-to-1 grades if you're in that situation. You can try to manage upwards, if at all possible, and influence whole school policy so that it's sensible, workable and robust. Only you will know whether that's going to be possible in your particular circumstance. But what if your system is intractable? What if you're stuck in some sort of flight path nightmare? All you can do is provide stats that work with the system. I don't think it's necessarily possible to make a valid correlation between your assessment system and what is required by your school's reporting system, especially if 9-to-1 grades are required. From what I gather, the new 9-to-1 GCSE grade boundaries will be set each year so that the same proportion of candidates achieve each grade. In this way, they're more tightly norm referenced than the old GCSE grades ever were. We won't have any idea of the grade boundaries until the first cohort's gone through, and even then it will only apply to that specific group of candidates. Plus, that's for GCSE assessment. Assessment of GCSE work, for all of those reasons, using 9-to-1 grades at Key Stage 3 is going to be difficult, to say the least. The bottom line here, in my opinion, is to make it fit and to find a way, whatever ingenious way works best for you, to convert your assessment data into whatever grades are required by your school system. The bottom line, I think, is that you will know whether your students are making progress or not. You can make the grades that you award reflect this. On this slide are the things that we're going to be reporting in our new incoming system at my school, which I'll quickly tell you just in case you're interested to know. We're giving them a very basic, how are they doing? Are they doing according to our expectations, above or below? We want to be specific about what they can do and what they need to work on. Rather than giving them specific targets that are a GCSE grade, we're being quite general about that and putting them into 3 bands. Are they likely to achieve one of the top GCSE grades between 7 and 9? Are they likely to achieve middly GCSE grades, or are they likely to achieve the lower ones? And we're also calling what has often been called an effort grade, we're calling it attitude to learning, which I think is quite a nice way of wording that. I'm going to leave what's on the slide now there in case you want to make a note of any of the useful links. I've got a few questions coming up on my screen, so I'm going to answer some of those now. One of the questions was, are radars shared with parents? And the answer to that is yes, I get them out at parents' evening and share them with parents. and I would certainly share them with parents if any parent contacted me and wanted to know more about what was happening in music lessons. They're not shared as a matter of course, they're not part of our system of reporting to parents. So yes, sometimes is the answer to that question. In answer to this question, do you see all students every lesson? I'm assuming, do I write something on the radar diagram for each student every lesson? The answer to that is it depends, and probably not, actually. It very much depends on what we're doing, how many groups there are, and you know, it depends on who I feel needs input on that particular day. Obviously, if I'm going around listening to groups and I don't get around everybody, if I don't get around everybody in one lesson, then I know who I should be prioritising the next time. And having that record really clearly there to see on the sheet makes it really easy for me to say, okay, today I'm going to come to your group first because I didn't see you last lesson. Next question is, how do you convince staff that the spreadsheet is a good use of time when expected to type levels into a separate system? Tried to introduce this after a CPT with Martin Fortley and was shot down. Oh, I really sympathise with you there. The way that I've convinced staff that the spreadsheet is a good use of time is that it's actually really quick. There's only going to be 12 numbers to put in for each student at the end of each project, which for us is once a term. So it is really quick, and what you get out of that in terms of information at a glance about each student's sort of cumulative progress and strengths and weaknesses, and it means that when I'm then requiring my staff to type levels into a separate system for the school reporting system, that you've got all of that information really easily to hand in a format that makes doing that next layer of stuff really easy. So yeah, they haven't complained. I do have an amazing department who are very on board and very willing to come along with my ideas, and I realise that I am extremely lucky to have that. Oh, I've got a very nice comment saying that we underestimate the role of parents in facilitating achievement. It's a great idea. Share your excellent practice. Thanks for that, Anthony. Oh, somebody's asked, when do you input the information on the Excel sheet, during lessons or in your own time? I would do that after lessons. Pretty much everything I write on the radar diagram sheet is during lessons. So I don't do a lot of faffing about with sheets and assessment stuff between lessons. So I'd only put things into the Excel spreadsheet at the end of a project. So once we've finished, then I would take everything on the sheets with the radar diagrams and bung it into the spreadsheet at the end. And I wouldn't necessarily do anything with the spreadsheet in between those times. Okay, really good question here from Elizabeth. She says that she finds it difficult to write up assessments during lessons when she's often helping students with their musical skills in a practical sense and showing them how to improve and develop. I find I'm often involved in the actual activity and therefore not writing up assessments contemporaneously. Yes, absolutely agree. And it would be possible to put things on the sheet afterwards, but chances are you're not going to remember all of the details. When I'm going around the room helping them, it means I'm often demonstrating things with a pen between my teeth, but I take the pen of the colour of the day with me as I'm going around the room, and it's just really quick just to jot down. So I might be showing things, giving loads of verbal feedback, and then before I move on to the next group, just quickly jot some things down on the sheet, stick some blobs in the relevant places before I move on. Then I can do both things. I can do the practical side, I can do the modelling, I can talk to the students, but still get things onto the sheet before it's gone out of my mind because I'm thinking of something else. Oh, this is a good one. Do you use radars for written work or just practical? Don't do a lot of written work. The time that I do use it is for if I'm assessing their critique. And when I'm getting students to critique their own work, that's when we listen back to a recording of some work in progress, and they write on just a small piece of paper with some guidelines on the board about the things that they need to be commenting on. They write some comments to critique their own work, and then I assess how good their critique is and give them a grade on the radar. But that's the only time that I use it for written work. Obviously, if you're using written work for different purposes in your lessons, then you could absolutely include that if that was a priority for you. That links on very well to Frank's question. Do students do any extended written tasks, and have students written down their compositions that you mark, or is all work practical? Pretty much all work for me at Key Stage 3 is practical. Extended written tasks occasionally happen for homework, but even with that, homework is a whole other thing that I could talk about for hours, but even with that, I'm moving to doing less and less extended written stuff for homework as well. So that's my view. Your view may well be very, very different, which of course is absolutely fine. Do pupils ever peer or self-assess and write their own radar sheets? There can be really valid and useful times when that happens, and we have done that, and it has been really successful. Sometimes we get the students to tell us where they think their blobs should go, or where they think each other's blobs should go, and then that sparks a discussion about whether they're right or not and whether the teacher agrees with them. The best times are when a student calls you over and says, Miss, I think you need to give me a new blob now because I'm much better at this. And that's when the radars, I think, are at their peak of wonderfulness, and you think, oh, this is really working for all of us here. So the answer to that is yes, it can be really valuable because it provides a framework for the students to really engage with how well they're doing things and what they need to do to move on. Next question from Jonathan is, how often would you record students' work, and how often would you expect them to access the recordings to develop their work? I tend to do it, and bearing in mind that our projects are really quite long, they're a term, so over the course of a term I might be recording every 3 weeks, maybe 2. So yeah, because of the way that we work, because we're all in one room, it does mean stopping proceedings to record. Obviously, if you've got them all in breakout spaces and you can get them to record their own or trot round and record them separately, then it's less of a thing because you don't have to stop everybody to record, and you can therefore do it more often. So I might do it 3 times maximum in the course of a project, maybe 4 at a push if it really is a project that lasts for the whole of a long term. This is a really good question about differentiation, and this is a real nub of a thing here. Do you ever have to differentiate radar headings for individual students? And the answer to that is yes, maybe. Particularly, there's 2 ways of doing this, and it just depends on what's going to be best for each individual student. Sometimes for students, particularly those with quite severe special educational needs or disabilities, I do differentiate the radar headings, or say, look, don't worry about those ones, focus on these ones, and so cut down the number of spokes on their radar, or I might just change what they need to do in order to achieve the can do or the can do really well blob. If it's really fantastic that particular student is doing it the way that they are because it shows real progression from what they what they were able to do before, then I might give a certain student a can do really well mark for that might be different to another student's. So it's one of those cases where it's about equity, not equality in that respect. And it's not treating everybody the same, and it's using all of your teacher antennae to really establish what is going to be the most useful and the most encouraging for each student, whatever their particular abilities are. So at that point, I've covered all of the questions that have popped up on my screen so far, which is great. If you have any further questions, if you think of anything, I'm absolutely happy to be contacted via email or via my blog. So please continue this discussion after the webinar if you would like to, or if that would be useful for you. I'll remind you again at this point that the webinar will be available via the ISM website and via the Music Excellence London website, so you can go back over things if you want to, or look at the links. My email address was on the first slide of the presentation, so you can find that there and you can get in touch if you wish to. Thank you very, very much for listening, and goodbye.